remember your first car? The one you paid your own money for? Do you remember what color it was? I remember mine. I love that car. It was brown, kind of crap brown color. Had about 100,000 miles on it. But here's the thing. I own that car. When my friends would get in the car, they would bring in their trash and their greasy fingers. I'm like, do not touch my car. And again, it was a beater, right? But I owned it. But here's the question. Do you remember your first rental car? Do you remember what color that was? Probably not. But here's the thing. You went up to the counter and you did that thing you do every time. You look through the contract that's many pages long and you were initialing here and there. They're asking you, do you want coverage for that? And of course, you always decline it. Do you always decline it? Does anyone prepay the gas? Does anyone get GPS anymore? But they keep asking you those questions, right? The whole purpose of that process is for them to get you to sign on the dotted line accepting responsibility for that car. But here's the thing. When you drive the car off the lot, you don't care what you do with that car. You don't care what trash you leave in it at the end of the journey, do you? Some of you think that's what it's for. There's a huge difference between responsibility and ownership. We're going to talk a lot about ownership today, and we're going to talk about a lot of other things around the data that Chris mentioned, and really interesting stuff. So if you want to tweet that, make sure you do it. I'd love to see that level of excitement around this data. But here's my Twitter handle. You can, we're going to do some fun stuff too. Do you guys want to have fun today? If I happen to mess up or make a funny face or happen to trip or something, would you guys please take pictures and tag me? Because that would make it more fun for everybody, wouldn't it? So let's talk about growth. When I started studying growth years ago within my own company and then with my clients and then recently through this deep research I did, really interesting stuff that came out of this. I looked at the Fortune 500 because those are the biggest companies, the biggest brands. And the growth that they've had is pretty dismal. In 2016, their growth across all 500 of those companies was 0.3% down. Now, I know they're big companies, but there's two main factors that are driving that growth or lack of. The first one being the pace of change. We are being disrupted. And that is causing us to think about strategies and think about what we're doing on a daily basis. And that's keeping us from growing in some cases. You got to figure those things out. When I was looking at the data of the Fortune 500 again, in year 2000, 52% of those companies that were on the list are no longer with us. They're either bankrupt, acquired by someone else, or they just don't exist anymore. Here's the thing. This pace of change, they're not staying relevant with the marketplace. The second factor in this is the rising sense of apathy in our workforce. I love this word apathy because it just really does capture, there's people coming to work and not working. You guys realize that? I know it's none of you guys, but people are coming to work and not working at all. And I want you to make sure that when you understand that this lack of engagement, a lot of people want to make that the villain. But when leaders invest in programs, leaders cast vision, leaders navigate change, the leaders are the ones responsible here, right? The real villain is ineffective leadership.
Put that coffee down. Coffee's for closers only.
You guys know this movie, right? If you walked into a sales meeting and you heard the words coffee for closers, you would know it was a joke because we wouldn't talk that way now. We have evolved as leaders. This is an extreme, but I bring this up because we've got to understand leadership. When I started working with these companies, it was really amazing to see what was out there. And specifically, what Chris was talking about is I studied the top of the mountain, the Inc. 5000. You guys are familiar with this list. They put it out every year. But it's 5,000 of the fastest growing private companies in America. And it's based on consistent growth, so it's over a 3-year period. To put this in perspective, let's look at the data. The average company is going to be in somewhere between that 5 and 40%. And I know what you're thinking, 40% over 3 years wouldn't be so bad, would it? But the people that I interviewed, the CEOs of those Inc. 5000, 51 of them, the average growth was 2,700% plus. That 3-year period showed consistency and it showed leadership. I had a chance to sit down with them in these one-on-one sessions. This wasn't, all done by survey and, kind of a faceless thing. A lot of it was virtual, but I talked to them about their sales and their marketing and their leadership and their culture. Really fascinating information, and it really was, got me excited about what I was uncovering. There was one question in there, though, that I thought was really powerful. It was this one. Oh, I know what you're thinking. 2,700% overachievers, right? Sorry, I missed the joke. Sometimes that happens. This one question was the real benefit of the research I did. With big growth goals, how do you get your employees motivated to take responsibility for those goals? It's a good question, right? How do you get them to take responsibility for those goals? After I talked with these leaders, it became clear. They corrected me in my thinking. It wasn't about responsibility. It was about ownership. That's one reason why I opened up with a little story about your first car and your rental car. You can see the gap between responsibility and ownership there, right? Very clear. In your workforce, do you want your employees to have responsibility or do you want them to have ownership? I think I know the answer. When I started talking to them about this, it was really cool to uncover ownership is this way to lead in which people feel like owners. They feel like they're a part of the contribution. They feel like they're growing with the company. And when you get people to feel inside your company, amazing things happen. Ownership that inspires them to do innovation and to do value creation is the key. And when your leadership inspires ownership, you've got something special. Ownership is yes or no, black or white. There's no shades of gray in here. It's very clear who's going to take full ownership of that project, the client experience, or the team. Ownership is not individual. It involves everyone coming together in certain times. 2 words came out of this research. We have conversations to get our employees to own it. We continuously have those hard conversations. We listen, we get commitment, we get promises, and we understand that what does it take for us to create this? We've got to get them to own it. Own the results. Own the process. That's what makes employees amazing. Another way to look at this is the entrepreneurial spirit. Now, before you guys go off on a tangent, this is not about helping your employees start their own business. It's not about helping them start that next startup. But it is about the way they think about the work. But see, most of the time, this entrepreneur spirit is what created the business in the first place. Taking the right risk, looking for opportunity, seizing the moment, being resourceful. And those are all qualities that the entrepreneurs have. Imagine you walked into work and the people in your team were innovating without being told they had to innovate. They were creating value because they knew that's what they wanted to do. And they were resourcefulness. We all have to do things with less budgets. And this is about having the entrepreneur spirit. One great example of that is I was talking to a director at a Fortune 500 brand in the hospitality industry, and I can't mention their name, but I was talking to them about this entrepreneur spirit, and he shared this story with me about a project he was working on to get this mobile application into the marketplace. It was a very important project. It was kind of a test bed, but IT department wasn't paying attention. Anyone ever had someone else, blocking you? So he's thinking to himself, what would I do if I owned this business, this little piece, this project? And he said, well, I would put traffic at it, so IT would have to pay attention. And that's exactly what he did. He figured out how he could use his own money to put traffic at it. He didn't go to get approval. He didn't do this stuff. And I know that a lot of people go, well, maybe we don't do that in our company. But he wanted to take a calculated risk. He was willing to risk his own money. That's the entrepreneur spirit. Now, you may be thinking that's a little bit weird or unsettling to encourage people to have this entrepreneur spirit and this sense of ownership. But I want to remind you that this is the way things are within our work. And one example of this happens to be when you actually learned how to dance. So I'm going to ask you to dance, but before anybody has any fear, we're not going to do this kind of dancing. I hear some nervous laughter over here. It's like, where's this guy going with this, right? We're not going to churn the butter, right? We're not going to do any of the dancing that we did in my high school, but we are going to go way back to the beginning. You ready to go on a journey with me? I remember walking into my middle school the very first time with the lights out, tables pushed over to the side, these chairs were stacked over here. I walked in, the girls were over here congregating, not talking to anyone else but themselves. The guys didn't know what to do. They're just standing around not talking to anybody. You were there, right? When someone finally got the courage to find this way to their first partner dance, you know which one I'm talking about, right? Stand up with me. Here we go, everybody. That first partner dance, there's no official name to it. I have named it the sway. So you go back and forth, right? Right? Do it with me now. We're back and forth. You don't know what to do with your body, so you got your butt sticking out. Your hands are in an odd situation. Up too high is weird. Down low is too creepy. I won't go there. Okay, you guys can sit down. The reason I bring that up is because it's awkward. But you have to go through those awkward moments to get to where you really wanted to go. You really wanted to be able to dance like Dirty Dancing. Maybe not. But leadership is the same thing. If you always avoid those uncomfortable situations like Brene talked about, you're not going to grow, and your team's not going to grow either. That's what this is about. Now, the biggest force in all of business and keeping the same is this concept of status quo. Not changing, not evolving. And it's so easy to fall into the pattern of what you've always done. You do performance reviews the way you've always done them. But I'm going to share with you some insights of things that you could change today to make you even more powerful leaders. And hopefully, leadership that inspires ownership. So my question is, will you lead hypergrowth? Will you be the person that really understands how to connect with someone? Ryan opened up this whole conference about connection. Business is about connection. Growing your business is about connection. And I guarantee you, you understand that with your people that you're leading. And if you're the ones that's on a team and you have a leader, you know how engaged you are when you actually feel like they understand you. My first journey of leadership was trial and by error. I spent 10 years in corporate America. I started my own business in 2001, and I grew that business pretty fast. The first year was about $1 million. Nothing too crazy, but I'll be honest with you, my revenue capabilities outweighed my leadership capabilities. And that caused a lot of problems. I showed up every day because I was trying to make the right decisions, but I felt more like a firefighter than a CEO. I certainly didn't feel like the leader of a 6-person team that was growing this fast. Because I put myself at the top of the food chain. I made every decision. I made every strategy. I was the one who had to replace the paper, right? I took that responsibility or ownership, if you will. I wouldn't let others do it. As I began to grow that company, I realized I had to let go. I had to let others carry the torch. And you all have to do that too. And I had to do this so that I could grow as a leader. That company did hyper growth. In my world, I doubled my revenue 4 years straight and my profit 4 years straight. And then something else happened. I fell into that status quo. I'd gotten to the place where I was comfortable. I wasn't really growing. I had thoughts. I knew I wanted to innovate, but I wasn't doing it. I was talking about it. I was running my mouth. I would plan some things, but I wouldn't do it. And I ended up in the biggest deal of my life. I was in Vancouver 8 years ago. Do you guys remember what happened in Vancouver 8 years ago? What was it? The Olympics. I had put together the biggest deal of my life. I had worked 18 months on this with my business partner, and we put together what I thought would be something that would make us a lot of money. I remember I was waiting on a phone call from him, and I remember him saying, "We've got a problem." The rest of that conversation was a little bit fuzzy, but there was a lot of blame and a lot of things going on that wasn't my responsibility. He had the ownership of that, but I had to live with it. The next few weeks were an absolute blur because I had to lawyer up. I had to find out what I was going to happen to me as in my business. I ended up losing $3 million that day. $3 million in one day. After that phone call, my wife comes in the room, and I was sitting on the edge of the bed, and I was literally just, I could not even talk. I had pain in my gut. I had just doubt rushing over me. And I remember distinctly her asking me, what's going on? And I told her, and she looked at me, and she goes, "Are we going to be okay?" I said, "I don't think so." A lot of people ask me, what does it feel like to lose $3 million? So something like this.
Come on. That was a good one.
I actually think it feels worse because it lasted a lot longer. But you get my point. This whole thing was something that defined me. It was an inflection point in my life, and I would not go back and redo it. Because it gave me a chance to be here today. It gave me a chance to actually serve the world. And I ended up writing a book about it. So everyone has questions about, what kind of business were you in, and how did this work out? So I wrote the book, and I wrote it looking back at my life, and I was trapped by my success. I was trapped by not really doing and living myself. That day, I lost everything. I even lost my identity. So if you want to get the full story, you can get the book in the bookstore. We decided to partner. All the proceeds that come to me go to a charity helping underprivileged kids to read. So if you want to get the story, you can go to the bookstore. I will be signing these if you guys want that. I don't know if you want it, but really is a fantastic book. Doing really well on Amazon. But that aside, when I'm working now with companies to help them improve leadership, I get to be the guide to help them see hypergrowth in new ways. I get to work with their leadership teams to do this. And so one of the key questions that comes up is this about you as a leader? When you think about hypergrowth, is it you or is it the team? Sort of a trick question. It's both. It has to be both. It can't be just one. You can't be pulling every employer along. You have to be there, and you're doing it together. And that's what this whole thing about ownership is about. The 6 disciplines are broken up into 3 categories: company, culture, and people. This is what they are. I know this is quick, But if you want to take a picture, you can save it. I'm going to go through each one of these, and this will come up again at the end. Lots of pictures. Good. Here we go. The first one is about vision. Vision typically comes from the top of the company. It is the future of what we're solving. It is what we're doing and where we're going. But here's the problem. When it only comes from the top, there's not much buy-in from everyone else. And so when I talk to these hypergrowth companies, they were very clear to say, we love to involve as many people as possible into the vision. They see the future. They know they're a part of it. And if they can contribute to that, even better. Those that create the vision have more ownership. We've seen that at the top. The challenge here is within your organization and within your teams, can you activate others to be a part of that vision? Can you include them? If you can't, because your company is so big, you've got thousands of employees, I get it. But can you take a cross-section of some of the leaders inside of each of those business units to participate in that? Because when people feel like their peers have been represented inside these conversations, they have more ownership. That makes sense, right? Innovation is something we talk about, but we rarely actually do. Think about that. You talk about it a lot, but are you actually testing? Are you actually doing this? An innovation that comes from the top down is nowhere going to near, tongue-tied, nowhere near going to be as powerful as innovation that comes from within. In one of the conversations I had with the leaders, I remember distinctly saying, ideas come from everyone. And this was replicated throughout those conversations, but he literally said, if I'm the smartest person in the room, I've got a problem. And if you're the smartest person in your meetings, it's a problem. You haven't allowed them to grow. Creating shared goals. I really love this one because it's so easy to do. It's so powerful. Here's what it looks like. We know we have company goals, and we know we have team goals. We talk about them a good bit within our organizations. We do this constantly in some cases. But you know there's that thing called personal goals. The people inside the teams have goals of professional growth. And the leaders that will create something that really does align these moments, the personal growth, with the team goals and the company goals, really does have something special. I had a chance to talk with James from Fiasco earlier this week, or last week it was, and I watched him again in there today, and I watched him interact and tell the story. One thing I saw here was he's doing this in a major way. And one example behind this was he was able to create a policy so that if people wanted to travel, they could travel. And even with pay. And I was like, with pay? But that's the culture he's built. He understands the value of this. And did you say third largest or third fastest growing in Canada? Is that right, James? Last 3 years. Align goals to create ownership. That's where the power is. I'm going to go a little bit deeper in this one because I really love this. The Cult Gathering is about creating one-of-a-kind brands, right? We're here seeing all these brands and watching these emerging brands. I love this work. Now, some of the data here was when I researched with the CEOs, they said either very important or extremely important. And 80% of the feedback came back was one-of-a-kind brand. One of the odd things that came out of this research was many of these companies, even the ones that were growing at 2,000 or 3,000%, they don't really have marketing departments because they've created something so special that it's them doing the marketing. One example is Tesla, and it's been brought up, and it's kind of maybe even overplayed a little bit, but maybe Chris actually showed something about this morning. He quoted this. Advertising Age talked about the power of their brand, and they don't treat the market and the market doesn't treat them the way everyone else does. For example, Toyota spends $2 billion plus each year to get people to pay attention, and Tesla spends nothing. I was having a conversation with a couple of the women that were here representing Tesla, and I asked them this question. I said, why is it that you're so engaged? Or I said, first, why are you engaged with Tesla? The answer is yes. But why are you so engaged? And here's the answer. They have a mission, and we feel like we're a part of that mission. Think about that. It's about their heart. It's about where they're going and their connection to the brand. And when you have employees that are like that, it really does provide more ownership in that entrepreneur spirit. Another example is Slack. I'm wondering, I can't really see well. Raise your hand if you're using Slack right now. That's well over 50%. They've come onto the market without much advertising at all because they created something that people needed to use. They wanted to get out of the inbox into something else. And if you talk about it amongst teams, that's one of the tools they would not be able to give up. So growth is by prioritizing the features, not necessarily about how much they can spend to get people to know about it. It really fits with that cult gathering kind of feel. Market leadership creates ownership. There's a sense of pride in people who feel like they're not just in a commodity-based business. There's a sense of pride that when you are able to activate that, you can see that in the way they take ownership in what they do. Radical transparency. Transparency is something that a lot of people have talked about for years with open book management. I remember that about 2 decades ago. And I haven't heard much about it, but you start hearing it more. If you really look at the data, it was very important for them to understand how they are showing up to each person inside the company, not to just the C-suite, not to just the insiders or the special people. The value of this to the organization was 87% was either very important or extremely important. This was the highest number of all the disciplines, by the way, because it was the basis for trust. People don't trust things when they're not getting the whole truth.
You want answers?
I think I'm entitled.
You want answers?
I want the truth!
You can't handle the truth.
Now, we all know this. It didn't work out so well for him, did it? If you think they can't handle the truth, are they really going to show up in a way to innovate and create value in your business? Think about that for a second. When people trust you and they make you a part of that process, you feel more trust. It's reciprocal. Innovation comes by allowing that transparency. Some of the best companies in here were talking about how they're failing consistently. In many cases, they're doing it in the weekly meeting. How did you fail this week? How did you fail this month? And some really avant-garde celebrate failure. They have awards for people that are doing really well, but they actually have an award where people get a trophy or such for failure. Think about that. Are you empowering the people in your organization to fail? One part of transparency is about the key performance indicators. Many of the companies talked about how important it was for everyone to know where they are based on expectations. Good leadership is about setting expectations. Would you guys not agree? Would you guys not agree? You guys are quiet. This KPIs became something that they could talk about, and they know where they stood. No longer were people asking for raises before they were ready because they knew what they were being measured to. And if it was part of their own personal growth, they're more engaged with that. They have that ownership. And if you want to take the radical part of this, they share them openly. These are not behind doors meetings. They go into the meetings and everyone in the marketing department talks about their specific KPIs. And if you have alignment, again, with those goals, everyone knows where they're standing. Radical transparency can really help you create that trust and ownership. Where do you draw the line? Where does transparency begin and end? Well, when you're radical, that line is right where it's legal. Most everybody was pretty clear to tell me they don't share salary numbers. They don't feel that they own that data. It's owned by the employee and it's shared within the company. But everything outside that is shared. Imagine a culture where you have that level of transparency. A lot of public companies face this when they go about what do we share. There was a great story when I was talking to one of the founders of HubSpot. And HubSpot had gotten to where they are by having transparency as part of their core values. And when they became public, there's new rules when you're a public company. Makes sense. You have to be a designated insider. So HubSpot doesn't like the status quo. So they look for other options. They were able to designate every employee as a designated insider. That's what happens when you are pushing forward to new things. Create brand ambassadors. This is something a little bit new, so let me explain this. A brand ambassador could be someone that you pay a salary to or pay something, outside your company. But why not look at internal brand ambassadors? Why not look at people that want to be lifted up and want to rise up and share the message of your company? 82% said this was very valuable or extremely valuable to their growth. They're using channels like speaking at conferences. We saw this today. We've seen many people from Beats and the Dallas Cowboys and Dropbox and all of the people here are brand ambassadors. They just happen to be internal employees and they're sharing the message. They're getting featured in the media and they're even becoming the media. One example is Bob Ruffalo, is someone I recently interviewed on my podcast called Leaders in the Trenches, where I talked to 5 different companies about their brand ambassador kind of strategies. And Bob Ruffalo has a branding design company, and 3 years ago he had employees that were saying, "You're speaking on stages, Bob. Why don't we get to speak on stages?" And he said, "That's a good idea. Why don't we figure that out?" Fast forward 3 years, now they have multiple employees speaking on stages at conferences. They even have 7 podcasts because they know the value of sharing content and they become the media inside their marketplace. What's really interesting there is there's only 50 employees. Pretty crazy to give them that level of voice inside the marketplace. So we talked about these 6 disciplines. I'm curious about something. I saw a lot of people taking notes. Which one of the 6 disciplines would be the most valuable for your organization? Think about that for a second. I really would like for you to write it down in your notes. I want you to just write down one of them. If you were going back and you would want to concentrate on one of these, which would it be? And let me take it just a step further. You're going back to the office on Monday. Who will be the first person you will talk to about ownership, about that discipline? Write that down because I'm not asking you to share it with us, but I want you to be intentional about this. A lot of people want to know, more details about the research. So if you want the full report, you can pull out your cell phones and download this. You're just going to text the word trenches to 38470. You can take a picture if you want to, but this will give you the full access to the data, the companies involved, some of the detailed stories behind this research, and it will give you more depth. If you want to actually do some of this, you can actually use that to help you. When I started looking at the data and spreading it out and just like organizing it, and remembering the conversations I had with these CEOs, I remembered one thing very specifically. I thought to myself that this is not something that just happens by chance. In fact, it's very much a part of their identity, part of their DNA. It's in their soul. In order to make that happen, you have to push past the awkward phases of this. I want to go back to the dancing again. You guys, I didn't learn to dance on that day walking into the middle school. I'll tell you, I was scared. I was shy. I was a nerd. But I do remember the exact moment where I learned how to dance, or at least I made the decision. I was at a wedding. I was 26 years old. I was standing on the sidelines, kind of waiting for someone to ask me. Beautiful girl takes me by the hand. She goes, "Would you like to dance?" I said, "Sure." I realized I didn't know how to dance, so that was a little awkward. I walked out there, and she said, "Do you know how to jive or jitterbug?" And I said, "Are you speaking English?" I didn't know any of those things. She goes, "What do you know how to do?" You know what I knew, right? The sway. That's all I could do. At the end of that song, I walked off the dance floor, and I realized I would never feel like that again. I would never feel the shame of not knowing how to do something, and I wasn't evolving. It was awkward. But you have to go through those moments. As a leader, you're going to have to go through moments of awkwardness where you are uncomfortable, but you have to make a decision and a commitment. Are you going to own it? I remember learning the lessons of dance when it was 1996 and Swingers was the movie out. Anybody saw Swingers? I found a place to go get some lessons. I found an instructor to guide me through the foundational elements of swing. A couple of weeks, I was doing pretty good. I was making this happen. I was still looking at my feet, still counting steps, and I was wondering, am I doing it right? Now, as leaders, we have those moments where we go into different phases of ownership and leadership where we're evolving, and we wonder, are we doing it right? That's common. You have to go through those awkward moments to get to those moments of acceptance. And then finally, you have this journey of the awakening. For me, that journey was learning the additional moves that I found in these old movies from the 20s and 30s. And I was able to write down in my notebook. I told you I was a nerd, right? And I would draw out the pictures, and I would break these things down, and I would bring them out to the dance floor, and I would become someone teaching other people how to do these moves. I became a leader. Now, in this phase, I need a volunteer. Who would volunteer with me? I got lots of hands. I'll take you. So, I could talk about dancing, or I could actually show you dancing. Would you like to dance? Oh. Dancing became a part of my identity. It wasn't about the steps. It wasn't about me learning those things. It became who I am. I am a dancer. Your journey of leadership has to include this identity shift of being a leader. And accepting hypergrowth is intentional. A lot of people have questions about how to do this in an organization, or what do I do first, or what if my organization would not accept this crazy entrepreneurial stuff? So make sure you find me. I'll be here the rest of the day. Still catching my breath. But make sure I've done 6 months of this research. I've done 6 years of working with hypergrowth companies, and I spent more than a decade of my own in hypergrowth. So if you think I could help you with some resource or maybe just a conversation, make sure you find me. And if you can't find me, that wasn't just some random person. That was actually my wife. But I know one thing for sure. the type of leader that you are is important to you. I'm not going to pretend I know what it's like in your organization, what hypergrowth is for you, but I really do know, and I feel certain you're a lot like me. You want to evolve. You don't want to look back at those moments when you know you could have done something different. You want to continue to evolve, and that's really important. So will you lead hypergrowth? Will you transform your leadership to activate the entrepreneur spirit? Will you inspire people to take real ownership of what they're doing in that client experience? How would you feel if you were a leader that inspired ownership? How would you feel if the owners that you are working with showed up every day for work ready to solve problems? They were looking for ways to innovate. And they knew that whatever they were doing was growing their company. And that's the key. That's really what you want. So, will you own it? Remember the rental car story? Very clear about how you felt about that first car and the rental car. Think about that for a second. You got to hold it in your mind. When you think about what you're doing, when you think about this, would you rather have your employees treat the projects and the clients like you did that rental car? With just responsibility? Or would you rather them treat it like they have ownership? All of this happened in this research. It just lit me up. I don't know if it excites you as much as I do, but I look at these hypergrowth companies. I'm watching what they're doing in the world. I'm watching them have a mission that's coming alive. And I see stories like James at Fiasco and many of the other people that are here today. But you could be that kind of leader too. You just have to make the decision to do it. You have to get your employees to own it. And you have to own it too. Thank you.